On December 15th, 1954, within the walls of Holloway Prison in England, the gallows awaited Styllou Christofi, a 54-year-old woman sentenced to death for the murder of her daughter-in-law. Christofi was among the last women to face execution in the United Kingdom, making her one of the oldest to be condemned there. The protagonist of this grim tale, Styllou Christofi, was born in 1900 in a rural village in northern Cyprus, then a British protectorate. Raised in a family stricken by poverty, she was deprived of education, never learning to read or write. In her time, Christofi lived in a village where the law of the jungle prevailed over formal law. The strong crushed the weak and dominated the village's power dynamics. Growing up in such a milieu, Christofi naturally evolved into a fiercely independent and stubborn woman, always imposing her views on others. As she reached marriageable age, her parents, destitute themselves, arranged for her to marry a man from a coastal village, the poorest man in town. Her husband's sole income derived from his family's modest olive grove. The family toiled in the grove, barely scraping by. Eventually, Christofi bore a son named Stavros and took on the arduous task of caring for her husband's son and her mother-in-law, Maria. Christofi's relationship with her mother-in-law, Maria, was fraught with tension. In the matriarchal society of rural Cyprus, where women typically held supreme authority within the family, Maria was an exceptionally stubborn and selfish woman, constantly making life difficult for Christofi. In other households, daughters-in-law might unconditionally obey their mothers-in-law, but Christofi found it impossible to submit to hers. Although uneducated, Styllou Christofi was a shrewd and decisive woman. If she disagreed with her mother-in-law Maria's behavior, she would not suffer in silence but would immediately retaliate. This led to endless arguments between Christofi and Maria, with the family often holding its breath as they watched these two formidable women clash. Over time, the rift between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law deepened. On September 29, 1924, at the age of 24, Christofi had a fierce argument with Maria. That evening, fueled by rage, Christofi lost control and decided to take drastic action against her unsuspecting mother-in-law. She conspired with two other women to carry out the deed and was promptly arrested by the police for the murder of Maria and brought to trial. However, Christofi was acquitted and released. At the time, she had been struggling to assert her authority over Maria in the household. One day, she stumbled upon a secret concerning the mysterious death of her father-in-law, which until then had remained unsolved. It turned out that Maria had orchestrated a plot back in 1911, where she and her lover had secretly killed her husband, staging his death as an accident to convince the family it was merely a tragic mishap. Upon discovering the truth, Christofi covertly informed her relatives about the secret of her father-in-law's death, urging that the family should seek justice for him and disregard Maria. In Cypriot society at that time, family honor was paramount. If a family member's behavior was socially unacceptable, the community might overlook the law to protect the family's honor. Maria's act of conspiring with her lover to kill her husband was an unforgivable crime that stained the family's honor. Persuaded by Christofi, the family agreed that Maria needed to be punished for tarnishing the family's reputation. Ultimately, on September 29, 1924, Christofi, with the aid of two neighborhood women, saw to it that Maria was made to pay for her crimes. As expected, the Cypriot court regarded Christofi's act of killing her mother-in-law as justified. Christofi was acquitted and released immediately after the trial. Shocked by the events, Christofi's husband abandoned her, leaving her to raise their son, Stavros, alone, thus necessitating her to become even more resilient. As time passed, teenage Stavros grew restless in the rural village setting. Like many young men of his generation, he yearned for the city life, despite his mother's objections. He moved to the city to seek work, becoming a waiter to save money, even amid the upheavals of World War II. During the late 1930s and early 1940s, many young Cypriots migrated to London, a transition made smoother by Cyprus being a British protectorate. Hence, the cultural shift felt less pronounced to them. In 1941, Stavros relocated to London, arriving with all his earnings from his city waitering job. There, he took up physically demanding labor before securing a position as a waiter at the Café de Paris, a nightclub located in the West End near Leicester Square on Coventry Street, Piccadilly. With his olive-hued eyes and a warm smile, Stavros was quite charming. He worked at this upscale London club where he met many attractive women. Among them was Hela, a German model who had migrated to England before the outbreak of World War II. Stavros fell in love with Hela, a fellow expatriate. She reciprocated his feelings and soon they began a romantic relationship. The couple married in 1942 to the admiration of all. Not long after, the young couple had 3 children. Following their marriage, they gradually built up their finances. Stavros continued to work at the Café de Paris, mingling with celebrities, while Hela took up a job at a fashion boutique. By 1953, Stavros and Hela had purchased a new home and decided to settle permanently in London. They worked hard and enjoyed spending time with their children in their new, luxurious home after hours. Their family appeared immensely happy, but alas, this happiness was short-lived. While Stavros was enjoying his days of happiness in the United Kingdom, his mother, Christofi, remained isolated in Cyprus. It had been 12 years since Stavros moved to England, and he had not once returned home. Additionally, Christofi was discontented that her son had married a foreigner rather than a Cypriot woman, and she was infuriated at being excluded from the wedding. One day, Christofi received a letter from her son in distant England. Stavros had written to invite her to visit him and her grandchildren in the United Kingdom. Grateful for the contact from her son, she decided to make the challenging journey to visit her son and grandchildren, despite never having left Cyprus in her life. In 1953, Christofi finally left her homeland to visit the United Kingdom for the first time and reunite in London with her son Stavros, daughter-in-law Hela, and her 3 grandchildren after 12 years of rural life. The dazzling lights and grand scenery of London overwhelmed her, and she was shocked by the lifestyle of her son and daughter-in-law, which was completely different from that in their native Cyprus. Her grandchildren spoke English at home and lived entirely as Britons, while her daughter-in-law Hela, who followed a different religion and was a foreigner, did not speak Greek, Christofi's mother tongue. With her previously domineering nature, Christofi decided to change everything in her son's household. She insisted that her son and grandchildren adhere to Cypriot traditions and at least speak Greek at home. Christofi meddled in household affairs, child-rearing, and Hela's cooking. Hela patiently waited for the day her mother-in-law would return to Cyprus, hoping for a return to normalcy. But when Christofi abruptly declared she would not go back to Cyprus, Hela was plunged into despair. The home of Stavros and Hela was no longer a place of happiness due to the mother-in-law's presence. Their once peaceful household had become a ticking time bomb of tension. Hela fell into depression under the oppressive demands of her mother-in-law Christofi. Throughout the year, she spent time outside the home with her children on weekends and after work to avoid her mother-in-law. In July 1954, Hela and her husband Stavros asked Christofi to return to Cyprus, but she seemed reluctant to leave. Eventually, Hela told her husband that she would go to Germany with the children under the pretext of visiting family there. She informed him that they would leave for Germany on August 12, 1954. Stavros promised to speak carefully with his mother about this once his wife and children were safely out of the country. Unfortunately, Christofi discovered that her daughter-in-law Hela intended to take the grandchildren to Germany, called Stavros, and angrily declared that no one could leave the house, especially not her grandchildren. Christofi concocted a plan to stay in England permanently with her son and grandchildren. The only solution that came to her mind was to eliminate Hela, an outsider who had disrupted her son's life. Christofi thought that even if Hela disappeared, she could still take care of the grandchildren herself. And the more she thought about it, the more she relished the idea of her daughter-in-law's disappearance from the family. On the evening of July 29, 1954, Stavros left for his shift at the Café de Paris at 8:02 p.m. After her husband went to work, Hela put the children to bed, tidied the house, and prepared for sleep herself. It was at this moment that Christofi stealthily approached her daughter-in-law from behind and attacked her. As Hela fell to the ground, Christofi swiftly removed her wedding ring and dragged her outside. She then set her on fire. A nearby neighbor witnessed Christofi igniting the fire, but mistakenly thought Hela was burning a mannequin, as Hela also ran a fashion boutique. Christofi was merely attempting to destroy her enemy, but contrary to her expectations, the flames escalated uncontrollably. Christofi screamed for help, prompting the neighbor to report the incident. Firefighters arrived at the scene and managed to extinguish the fire. Hela's body was found among the remains. The police immediately contacted Stavros and briefed him on the situation. Upon returning home at 3:30 a.m. and learning of his wife Hela's death at the scene, Stavros was overcome with grief. The police cautiously approached the shocked Stavros to take a statement from his mother. They questioned Christofi about the events. She appeared flustered by the police's inquiries and claimed ignorance, stating she had simply run outside and screamed upon seeing the fire. Sensing something amiss, the police promptly searched the house, confirming signs of a struggle and evidence of arson. They began to suspect Christofi, who was in the house at the time, as the prime suspect. An examination of the scene revealed that Hela had not died from the fire, but had been physically attacked. Additionally, Hela's wedding ring was found in Christofi's bedroom. Based on the neighbor's testimony of seeing Christofi burning something, the mother-in-law from Cyprus was identified as the main suspect and was arrested. On October 25, 1954, the trial of Styllou Christofi commenced. In court, her son Stavros testified about the strained relationship between Hela and his mother. He revealed that Hela had never removed her wedding ring during their 15 years of marriage and suggested his mother could have removed it. A psychiatrist who had examined Christofi while she was detained at Holloway Prison testified that she suffered from delusional disorder and had exhibited bouts of frenzied screaming at night. Christofi's defense argued that she committed the crime in a state of mental confusion and insisted she should be confined to a psychiatric hospital for treatment. Upon hearing this, Christofi asserted that despite being a poorly educated woman, she was not insane and was in sound mental condition. Her insistence on her mental normalcy proved detrimental during the trial. During the trial for the murder of her daughter-in-law, Christofi shockingly confessed to also killing her mother-in-law 30 years earlier, revealing a secret past. Her son Stavros was stunned to learn that his mother had killed not only his wife, but also his grandmother. 2 hours after the trial began, the court found Christofi guilty of murdering her daughter-in-law Hela out of jealousy over her youth and appearance, and sentenced her to death. On November 29, 1954, Christofi appealed, but it was immediately dismissed, and her death sentence was upheld. Following the trial, her son Stavros never visited his malevolent mother again and severed all contact with her. Christofi continued to write letters to her son, expressing her longing, but he never responded. Enraged by her son's behavior, Christofi blamed him for her death sentence, showing no remorse or concern for anyone but herself. Shortly before her execution, Christofi became fearful and requested her son to petition the court on her behalf, but Stavros completely ignored her plea, stating he could never forgive her. Knowing that her son had abandoned her, Christofi resigned herself to her fate. On December 15, 1954, Christofi, who had murdered both her mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, was executed. She walked to the gallows at Holloway Prison with a resigned demeanor, ending her life in isolation as her son did not attend the execution. Surprisingly, before her execution, Christofi requested that a Greek Orthodox cross be hung on the wall of the execution chamber as her final wish, and the prison authorities granted this request. The cross remained there until the room was demolished in 1967. It is perplexing how a woman capable of such cold-blooded murder could find solace in religious faith, or rather, how her actions could invoke disgust and highlight the monstrous chaos within her from her youth to her old age. This concludes the case of Styllou Christofi. What are your thoughts on this case? Please leave your comments below this video. Goodbye and see you next time.